Good afternoon. Today we will be discussing Shelley's celebrated Ode to the West Wind. Ode to the West Wind was written by Shelley in 1819 when he was in Florence in Italy. The poem was composed in 5 stanzas or thematic sections, all revolving on the influence of the west wind on every element of nature, including the poet himself. The first 2 stanzas of the poem describe the west wind primarily in its character as a destroyer rather than as a preserver. The wind cannot be seen, it must be felt by witnessing its effect on things which can be seen and which are the objects or the agents of its power. In stanza 1, these agents are the leaves, like ghosts, they are thin and frail, fleeing from an enchanter, and the winged seeds blown to the ground and buried like corpses in a grave, but in fact resting in cradles to be reborn with the coming of spring. The images in this stanza can strike one as being incidentally felicitous, reinforcing the impression of a spring landscape to which the unfolding buds also belong. But they do not combine to produce a powerfully integrated effect. The force of the stanza is created more through its rhythms than through its imagery. It is worth pointing out, I believe, that at this stage of the poem, the imagery is all of a piece limited to the earth and the beings and objects on it. There is no hint of the presence of the sky and sea that is the subject of the following stanzas. But whilst in this sense the stanza is discrete, in a retrospective sense, it will be discovered to have been a preparation for what follows. That is to say, the stanza offers no positive links with what is to come, other than the presence of the west wind itself. But it is to come, we shall find provides many links with what it has come from. Words and groups of words that are to be used in the next 2 stanzas will suggest very strongly a link backwards to what happened, to be discrete and unconnected in the first stanza. Throughout the first division of the poem, Shelley has been chiefly occupied with the west wind's task on the earth, as he watched it visibly at work around him, or as he went beyond the present and imagined it coming in the spring. The second division of the poem treats of the wind in the heavens, and here he is still thinking of its local and apparent activity as it is present before his eyes. But in the third part, he leaves his particular point of observation. His thought passes beyond the wood with its trees stripped of leaves, its heaven of flying clouds, its signs of the coming storm, and his imagination takes a wilder flight. He sees the west wind at work on the water, as he has seen its impress on the earth and sky. He sees it as a vision troubling the water of the coast many miles to the southward, rousing the otherwise tranquil Mediterranean Sea from his summer dreams, and then detaching himself more completely, as it were, from its local and special manifestations. He follows it in its course across the vast expanse of the ocean. He invokes the wind very powerfully in this poem, for whose path he says the Atlantic's level powers cleave themselves into chasms. The third stanza of the poem essentially reverts to the west wind as a preserver, at any rate, as a power that enlivens and invigorates, rather than one that buries and entombs. There are 2 pictures, as it were, of the west wind and its influence, one of the Mediterranean, the other of the Atlantic. Shelley can usually be counted on to reproduce accurately the effect of light on water. We have seen it in many earlier poems of Shelley as well. On the part of the ode we are looking at, the Mediterranean is lulled to sleep by the sound of streams flowing into it. These produce the effect of currents observed on the surface as coils, gently binding as well as lulling the recumbent inland sea. As the sunlight beats on the surface, the proximity of wave and day, along with the emphasis on blueness of the sea, intensity, and quivering surface, releases the hidden word ray as a ray of light, creating that quivering effect on the water. The submerged palaces, for example, and towers at bay seem to float and move under the wave. Presumably, the moss and sea flowers do quiver as the light strikes down to them and the motions of the water rock them. The impressions of clear light in both air and sea is intense, not merely blue, but azure and crystal, producing this effect of calm brilliance. It is easy to understand why wind in the abstract, any strong, masterful wind, must have had a special attraction for a poet of Shelley's temperament. He recognized that there was something in his own uncontrolled nature, originally akin to a creature so tameless and swift and proud. Shelley, moreover, was peculiarly alive to the tireless energy, the incessant and intricate activity of force in creation, and for him, the different forms in which this protean activity manifested itself had a positive personality. The dull, dense mass of water, in this case matter, is constantly represented by him as plastic, as being outwardly changed or shaped or driven by force or spirit. The cloud in the poem, which we naturally associated with Ode to the West Wind, is brought before us, living and acting, and our thoughts are directed to it as a force in the moving scheme of things. His invocation to the wind to make him its lyre is reminiscent of his comments in his essay on Christianity, where he says, and I quote, "There is a power by which we are surrounded, like the atmosphere in which some motionless lyre is suspended, which visits with its breath our silent chords at will." Unquote. The will, according to Shelley, is that power not of the lyre of human consciousness upon which it breathes. To receive the power, the poet must use his will to harmonize his own identity with what he calls an exquisite constantiety of powers. This is what Shelley is recommending essentially to himself in the last stanza of the ode. As a poet of nature, Shelley is thus often dynamic, even when Wordsworth appears rather static before us. Shelley is absorbed in the thought of nature at work, and he views the world not merely as a visionary appearance mysteriously illuminated with the indwelling divine life, but as a shifting expression of underlying and interacting forces which he individualizes as personal powers. These are the issues broadly which are to be kept in mind when we shall be discussing and going to the text and analyzing the lines of Ode to the West Wind in the next class. Thank you.